All right, everybody, I think we're going to get started here. Looks like we've got enough folks at the table. All right, I'm calling to order the October 21st, 2024 meeting of the ACCSP Coordinating Council. So welcome, everybody. We'll start off with a couple of housekeeping items. The first is approval of the agenda. Are there any additions, deletions, changes to the agenda that anybody would like to make? Looking around the room, not seeing any hands in the room. Anyone online with a hand up? Virtual hand? No one online. So I will propose that we approve the agenda as submitted. Anybody willing to make that motion? Thank you, Pat. Motion made by Pat. Is there a second? Thank you, Ray. Any objections to the motion? Seeing none, the agenda is approved. Next up is approval of the proceedings from our last meeting in April 2024. Any edits, changes, additions, anything to the meeting minutes from the last meeting? Not seeing any in the room. Any hands online? Okay. Any objections to approving the minutes as submitted? No hands in the room. We'll consider the minutes approved as submitted. All right. Next up is public comment. Is there anybody in the public, all three of you in the room, that would like to say anything that is not currently covered on the agenda? No hands in the room. Any hands online? No hands online. Okay. With that, let's get into the heart of our agenda here. So the first thing we're going to do is to consider the FY 2025 project and administrative proposals for funding. And I am going to turn that over to Julie to take us through. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the first slide we're going to have is the comparison of the rankings of the maintenance projects. It was important for the operations and advisors that we show you both of their rankings because there were differences in how those turned out, although they did come to consensus on their recommendations. So the operations committee ranking is on the left-hand side and the advisors ranking is on the right-hand side. And for a little bit of ease, they're highlighted in the colors that match. So you can kind of cross the colors a little bit to see the order of their rankings. And so these are the three maintenance proposals. These were ranked using the consolidated rankings. For those of you that are familiar with that, there's less questions on that form because not all of the funding was necessary to cover the maintenance proposals, not all 75% of that. So the next slide is the comparison of the rankings of new projects. So again, these are in order by their rankings with the operations committee on the left-hand side and the advisors ranking on the right-hand side. Please note that the recommendation for funding is indicated by the dark green squares. So the projects that are recommended for funding are the top 5 on the left-hand column and then the top 4 and number 6 on the right-hand column. The 3 projects that do not have green are not recommended for ranking or not recommended for funding in the recommendations from that was consensus. So the funding summary, we have an expected level of 3.5 million. The administrative proposal is 2.35 million. And then the 3 maintenance proposals come in at 602,000. Again, this is under the 75% rate. So then the 8 new project proposals come in at a little over $1 million. So the request for funding is at about 4 million. So that is about $500,000 more requested than what we have. We did want to note that the administrative proposal is, and this will be part of our discussion later, is that the administrative proposal is now approximately 67% of the 3.5 million for ACCSP funding. It is slightly larger than last year's, but we have increases due to full staff support and the ability for more in-person meetings. However, we also had significant increases in equipment and supplies, but it wasn't necessary to put those costs in the administrative grant because we were able to secure funding for those things through IRA and FIS funding that ACCSP staff was able to arrange. So the average ranking of maintenance projects, all three projects were ranked for funding. Again, the maintenance proposals are 58% of the 1 million available for project funds, which is below the 75% split. And it is recommended that all the proposals be supported. We did also include in the titles for each proposal the year of funding that they're in. So right now, the 100% lobster harvesting is in year 4. You'll note that that's not an actual calendar year. It's year 4 of funding because there are years that Maine has not actually applied for that project. And the Potomac River is in year 5. So this is their first year of step down. They'll do step down again next year and then no longer be eligible for funding. And the North Carolina Socioeconomic Database is in year 2 of funding. We do want to note, however, that the costs on both this page and the next page are different from your materials. Late last week, Maine did indicate that there's been a change in their indirect rate that decreased by about 8%, and that was across all three of their proposals. So that added about $24,000 back into the pot. So thank you very much, Maine, for making that adjustment for us. So that does adjust some of those numbers, and those are what appears on the slide. So that's why it differs slightly from your materials. In the average ranking for the new projects, the top 3 projects there did fall above the line. And then you'll see that the next 2 projects there on expanding the commercial fisheries research foundation's black sea bass, and then also the Maine halibut fishery. Those are ones in yellow. That's because they are recommended for funding, but there are not quite enough funds to make all of those to actually fund all of those projects. So that'll have to be a discussion for today. So the operations and advisors, as I mentioned, did come to consensus on their average rankings. They recommend that all maintenance proposals and the administrative budget should be funded in full. And they recommend support for new proposals by the average rankings with the suggestions below to fund the top 3 projects. They did want to note that the enhancing recruitment and retention for the South Atlantic Release Citizen Science Project was not ranked as highly by the advisors as it was by the operations committee. But the operations and advisories committees both agree that the following projects that are listed in priority order should be funded. And that is 1, expanding the Commercial Fisheries Research Foundation's Black Sea Bass Research Fleet into the Gulf of Maine. And then 2, port sampling for the Maine halibut fishery. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jeff and Jay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Julie, and thank you to both operations and advisory committees for preparing all this and doing all the hard work of the proposal reviews. On this slide, this gets to a bit more of the conversation at coordinating council of where to go with the funds. What I've done is removed the 3 projects at the bottom that were below the line for funding. And again, because Maine reduced their indirect rate, the Black Sea Bass project, the 4th in the list, is really what I would consider above the line for funding. It's just under $6,000 short, but we can figure out, that to make the Black Sea Bass one whole. The discussions about the Maine halibut fishery is really, I wanted to extend the thoughts of, at this point, we are entering the 5th year of the ACCSP cooperative agreement. There is the capability to extend that, but given the unknowns of what the fiscal climate is going to be in a few months, the question kind of comes up of where does the Coordinating Council want to go at this point in terms of supporting the 4 projects that have expected available funding, assuming we are level funded at 3.5 million, or whether there's a desire to try and find the funds to include the halibut fishery proposal and an additional $30,000 for that. And really it's the question of what, if any, buffer or reserve should be considered as held kind of at the admin grant for unforeseen events. We've had a few of those this year in the spring, as well as the fall rolls through and what may happen with the election. And again, we're in the 5th year of this funding cycle. And so those were a few of the questions that I wanted to at least put forth for discussion in terms of how far to go with this. As we're in the 5th year, I did want to remind folks that the the savings that we had during years 1 through 4 was allocated to projects last year. That was kind of an additional $250,000 that was in the admin grant that was selected for project funding last year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jay to kind of lead this discussion about where you all want to go in the balance of funding projects. And that.
Great. Thank you so much, Julie, and thank you, Jeff. And thanks to the Ops Committee and the advisors as well for those solid recommendations. So I think at this point, what we're looking for, one structure that we could use for this is to break this up into 3 separate motions, one for the administrative grant, one for the maintenance proposals, and then the new proposals, there's some nuance there. So, so that's where we're at. Do we have any questions from folks before we get into the deliberations on this? Anyone with questions? Yep, down in the back, and I apologize, I can't see her name.
It's Brandy Salmon. Sorry, I was trying to turn it earlier. So question about if we decide to try to look for, dedicate some funds for the new projects, the 5th one, what does that look like if we can't find the funding for it? Like, how does that play out in the long run?
Great question. Jeff or Julie, you want to field that one?
I'll partially start with it and then hand it over to Mr. Kelleher in Maine. The first question is really, we don't know at this point if the 3.5 million is what will actually come through as the funding. So there's a bit of a curiosity there. Is it going to be 3.50, 3.53? There's the opportunity to kind of support the ops and advisors recommendation of if there's available funding when we know what it is to support the halibut project. If the available funding comes in lower, then we'll have to figure that out. But I'm not expecting that that finding this money would have to come out of the other projects at the moment. We'd have other places to look. Pat, what would it look like if halibut was not?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think from the state standpoint on the halibut, for us to just clear, I'm not looking for pulling money from other projects, or not my intent to go in that direction. I think if I'm quite understanding the timing, Jeff, of when you might know about the full allotment that would come in, and whether we would have potentially any additional dollars that could fund halibut. But from the state's perspective, I'm not going to be able to hire any contract staff or do any staffing up of that project for the port sampling until we know the data is coming. We're not going to be, we're entering a very, very tight fiscal climate in the state of Maine. And so any flexibility I would have with discretionary funds within the agency I've got a tight hold on those right now. So I can't open the door to start funding with not knowing that it's there. So we're kind of in a wait and see mode.
Unfortunately, I can't answer the question of when we'll know, because that's kind of up to Congress. Unless, Bob, you have more information, but crystal ball.
Yeah, I can't predict Congress any better than anyone else here can. But I mean, if there's a continuing resolution, then theoretically we would be at the 3.5 million. So if they get hung up and are unable to pass a new budget for this fiscal year, then continuing resolution would be good in a sense for this project or this program at 3.5. But we don't know. We know all we know is through mid-December right now, and then we have to see what happens.
Great, thank you. Brandy, all set with that? Okay, Renee.
Thank you. I just had a question, thinking kind of back on the history of this type of thing. I know there's a lot of precedent for us kind of supporting maintenance projects that fall below the line, but have we had this type of discussion before for a new project that was recommended but fell below the line? And this is not to poo-poo Mr. Kelleher's project here. I know there's support for it, but I'm just trying to think back in discussions sitting on ops as well, whether we've had this scenario before where we say, oh, let's go look for money for a new project.
Jeff or Julie?
I would say yes, there is precedent to have the discussion. The herring proposal had come up several times in the past about how to fund staff to do herring sampling. In this case, this is, I think, all equipment for the aging and equipment to go with the halibut fishery. And this was a proposal that was submitted last year that happened to fall below the line for what that matters. But yes, it has been discussed before, and it is up to the coordinating council to have the flexibility and latitude to decide where to go with these things.
Good, Renee. Okay. Anyone else with questions? All right, not seeing any around. Oh, yeah, Carrie.
I'm curious about Maine's timeline for needing the materials, the equipment. So what if we sort of hedged our bets and decided or recommended to maybe not immediately find the funds, but wait and see through some portion of the fiscal year before it felt, I don't know, safe enough that those funds could be allocated to a project at a later time?
Able to respond, Pat?
I probably need to know sometime in February in order to make sure I'm implemented prior to the season, prior to the halibut season.
Thanks for that, Pat. Okay, not seeing any more hands around the table. Any hands online? Oh, go ahead, Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just thinking about the administrative proposal, and I certainly don't want to discount the fact that we're dealing with cost increase, but I think what Julie mentioned earlier, that it's about 60% of the total, if I recall correctly. Has it always been greater than 50%? It seems like the administrative side is growing. It's impacting the state proposals more and more, and just I don't think there's anything we can do about it now. I'm not here to speak against the administrative budget. I think it's just something we need to keep an eye on, just from the standpoint of the state's kind of losing out as the administrative side grows. And if that's the case, then maybe we need to put this on our priority list from congressional ask for money, because that's a good story to tell, I think, as far as our hill visits. So.
Yeah, thanks for that, Pat. Did you need a response to the proportion there? Or?
I mean, having an idea, I mean, I didn't look it up, so having some idea would be great, I think.
Yeah, so Jeff, Julie, the question is if there's been like a trend in the admin grant over time, and is this the highest it's been, or?
Julie?
Yeah, right now it's at 67%. It is a trend. It has gone up. Not in a completely linear fashion, but in kind of a very slow, very slow slope fashion. But it did come up in the joint meeting, but then also the advisors have their own meeting. And they did bring up, they asked the question of when the last time ACCSP had an increase in our line item, and the answer is never. They were interested in how they could help with that, which not easy because of that, but that's to answer your question.
Thanks for that, and your comments well taken. Thank you, Pat. Okay. Not seeing any other hands around the table. What we're looking for are some motions. So I'm looking for somebody to be bold here and offer a motion. So we're looking one for the admin proposal, one for the maintenance proposals, and then maybe a more nuanced one with the new proposals. Okay, Brandy?
Yeah, I move to approve the ACCSP administrative proposal.
Thank you, Brandy. Seconded by Marty Gary. Thank you, Marty. Any discussion on the motion? Brandy or Marty, anything you wish to offer? Pretty straightforward. Okay, thanks for that. All right. Can somebody flag me down if you need some time to, I don't know that there's anyone for you to caucus with now that I think about it. So let's go ahead and vote. So all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Okay, is any, Jeff's tracking it.
Oh, good. Line of council.
Sorry, one more minute. Just to check, so that was 16 in favor. Is there anyone opposed? Same sign? No, I didn't think so. Any abstentions? Just to check. Any no votes? It's not possible here. Good. All right. Unanimous approval of the motion. Thanks, everybody. One motion down, 2 to go. Carrie, go ahead.
I move to approve the 3 maintenance proposals as recommended by the operations and advisory committees.
Thank you, Carrie. Is there a second to that motion? Second by Ben. Thank you, Ben. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, maybe I can just do, are there any objections to the motion? Any hands online objecting? Okay, good. We'll consider that motion approved by unanimous consent. 2 down, 1 to go. So this is the more challenging one. John in the back. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, so move to approve the top 4 ranking new proposals through the main Black Sea Bass project.
Okay, first, are you seconding, Pat? Okay, let me see if there's a second for John's motion first. Okay, there's Ron. Thank you, Ron. Second by Ron Owens. Thank you. Okay. Pat.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just wondering if there is any willingness to, in case we get additional funds available through the appropriations process, that the halibut project could remain above the line with the idea that it will not be funded unless available funds come into ACCSP.
So we could do that in one of two ways. We could, if somebody would agree to add that into the existing motion. I'm not sure if you're offering that as an amendment.
I would offer it as a friendly, it's been motioned in second, so the motion now belongs to the board. So however you want to handle it, if you want to use Pat's rules of order or Robert's rules of order, it all depends.
So maybe because I'm not good enough at that stuff to know whether that's appropriate, we can handle it as a separate motion. This is not exclusive of that. So why don't we dispense with this one and then we can come back to it. Okay. All right. So we've got a motion. It's been seconded. Little discussion there. Any other discussion? I think that was John who made the motion. Anything for you, John, on this? Okay, John's good. And then Ron, anything? All right. Let's get to it then. Are there any objections to the motion on the table? Not seeing any hands around the table. Anyone online? All right, no objections online either. So we will consider that motion approved by unanimous consent. And then if there's anything anyone else wants to add, Pat, go ahead.
I'll try to wing a very simple motion here for staff to keep up, but I would move that the main halibut proposal will remain above the line to be funded if additional funds become available.
Great, thank you, Pat. Seconded by, let's see, I'll go the second with Erica. Thank you, Erica. Okay, we got a motion. It's been seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Eric.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not even sure if I'm supposed to comment here, but there's a lot of things going on with halibut besides what's happening in Maine. And I think that this motion is totally appropriate to support the Maine fishery, but it's also going to help support American fisheries in international waters at some point. So I would support that.
Thank you, Eric. All right, we've got a motion. We've had a little discussion. Anyone else before we call the question? All right, I'm not seeing any hands. Are there any objections to the motion on the table? Seeing no hands around the table. Anyone online? No objections online, so we'll consider this motion approved by consent. All right, I think that does it for that. And the next agenda item is to move on to program updates, which Jeff will take us through. So whenever you're ready, Jeff.
Great, thank you. And just before we step into, thank you everybody for supporting the funding process, critical piece of ACCSP. Before we get to the program updates, we don't need to identify all the members right now, but I did want to highlight that the ACCSP funding subcommittee is up for kind of reconstitution and confirming that membership over the winter. This is a group that historically has represented by ASMOC, Babil, and NOAA. We have the council chair, kind of north-south representation, the operations committee chair with north-south representation, an advisor, and then of course ACCSP staff. So during the operations committee and advisory meeting, they did reappoint membership to include Nicole Lango Costa from Rhode Island, Mary Ellen Gordon in New Jersey, and Julia Bird in South Atlantic Council, and for the advisors, Fran Karp. So I hadn't prepared the conversation in you all before this, so we can either, it's probably best to email poll folks and have them appointed outside of this meeting, unless you wanted to handle it during the meeting. Unless there's a volunteer. So we'll do it after.
I'm not sure what you're asking is, do they need to vote?
Not to vote. If there are volunteers on the coordinating council that wanted to be members of the funding subcommittee, Bob, you maintain your chair role. Yeah, I don't think you can hand that one off. If there are other volunteers that wanted to be part of it, please raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll handle that elsewhere. Kathy? Outstanding. Thank you, Kathy, for volunteering.
Any other volunteers? Okay, and so we can follow up
Yep.
on this afterwards.
We'll fill in the gaps after the meeting over email.
Very good. Thank you, Jeff.
And then that group will have probably a winter meeting to discuss next year's RFP and possibly revising the scoring beyond the catch effort and biological as the two top modules for funding, as well as extending this conversation that we just started about the balance between future projects and admin tasks and searching for ACCSP funding. Again, something that was brought up at the Operations and Advisory Committee and touched on during your conversation today. With that, we'll move to the program updates. So the first thing is really to look back a little bit at completed items that were from the 2024 action plan. So a little, definitely some excitement here. We have been able to implement expanded at entry quality control checks for safest E-trip submissions. There were a lot of partner attributes that we're not getting the same data quality checks as other core elements. That has had a workshop in 2023. We got FIS fundings to complete that, and that work is largely complete and set for implementation in E-trips now. We were able to continue to extend one-stop trip reporting across the federal permits, so that getting HMS, Southeast Logbook requirements, as well as GARFO requirements into safest E-trips. So really the one submission technically can cover for all data, sharing the data in the background and making that a lesser burden on the fishermen. We've been able to support collection and management of spatial data, the lobster vessel tracking devices, and also launched the SciFish mobile application and project builder for standardizing citizen science data collection. So exciting movements on all of those things that were highlighted in the 2024 action plan. We've also made significant progress in data distribution and use. There was the completion of the North Carolina biological data feed to get all that information to ACCSP. The next step of that is for it to go from ACCSP down to Miami, the Southeast Fisheries Science Center. They're actively working on that with a goal date of finishing that in November. The other thing that's going to follow from that is getting the Southeast tip data sent to the ACCSP data warehouse. So again, populating the biological data module, which is a big step for us. And the other longer bullet there is all of the stock assessments and CDARs that ACCSP was able to provide commercial landings data that were validated by the states. So thanks to all of you who have been doing that. And next slide, please. Moving to the 2025 action plan, highlighting here things that will be discussed and approved at the business session on Wednesday. But really, partnerships are a core component of the national collaboration of fisheries data collection. We are continuing to improve our overall efficiencies by sharing knowledge, technical approaches, and yes, even direct sharing of software to enable similar progress in parallel jurisdictions. And so one example of that is with MRIP APIS. We were able to share that software program with the Gulf of Mexico, then actually with NOAA Office of Science and Technology to implement out in Hawaii. And there's ongoing efforts to do that with the SciFish application, which I will touch on a little bit later. In the coming year, we're going to continue the development and implementation of modernized dealer reporting application and data processing by January 2026. This is something that was slated, we wanted to get completed by January 2025, but we made a large number of changes early in the year to help Garfo move some of their dealers from a file upload application to an API. That's a precursor to this step of dealer reporting. And then we had some slowdowns because of other intervening activities in the spring and some staffing issues and other projects that were running long. So that is really moving to, we'll probably get the programming done for EDR in the middle of 2025, but we also listened to the partners and saying, when that rolls out, it should be the entire package all at once. That means online, mobile, upload, data queries coming back out. And so those 4 parts will kind of get developed and tested throughout the year. The good news of this is even if we're ready early, it'll allow a little extra time for the outreach and implementation to get that out to the dealers before that needs to happen. Generally, the partners have not wanted us to change dealer reporting system mid-fishery season, which would be a little more difficult. Within SAFES, we also want to extend the one-stop reporting initiative to convene a workshop on state requirements. So as the federal things come together, really looking to see what are the additional state needs that we can extend that program with. And then under recreational surveys, we want to continue to develop and seek certification of the for-hire methodology for logbook estimates of catch and effort with dockside validation. This is really working with MRIP to continue a bunch of work we've already started, some mathematical analysis of existing data sets and go make the math more consistent and answer some of the questions that their consultants had about sensitivity analyses. And that timing is actually in parallel with some actions by the councils on ceasefire and did not fish reports that ACCSP remains involved in with these conversations. So again, a lot of partnerships that are helping to drive those activities in our coming year. Other items for 2025 in the action plan under new tasks. Already mentioned the state requirements under recreational surveys. The recreational group is really supporting data collection of pilot projects. So there was the discard project that was just supported for funding under the new projects, as well as large pelagic pilot survey. So these are items that are happening through MRIP. They're supported by state staff to actually do the field work and ACCSP staff to get the data coordinated and passed through the middle of that. And then also work on our standards to really define the data consolidation standards and presentation for release, catch, discards, and at-sea observer data across dealer, trip, and citizen science records. And what that really means is it's collected in many ways, and we need to discern how to put that puzzle together and still present it in a useful way on the discard information to help out with the stock assessments. Other new tasks under the action plan are data distribution and use. We've got a new list of stock assessments for the commission and the CDR process. We have an annual data load process for commercial data. And now that we're populating the biological module a bit more, we need to come up with that annual data load process for the biological information, whether that is lobster, herring, southeast tip data, ultimately Northeast Fishery Observer Program as well. So that's a task to do all that coordination and set up the planning for that. And then finally, to expand the data warehouse content with emphasis on presentation of the recreational directed trips and catch frequency queries. Those are things that had been around a while back and we're needing to update the math and presentation on. And so Alex and his team will be working on that throughout the coming year. The last items under the action plan for new tasks are really to improve the IT hosting scalability to address the increased data demands. So this has to do partially with overall increases in electronic trip reporting. As Ed Martino presented to you in April, that pales in comparison to the positional tracker information in terms of numbers of rows. It's not a huge volume of data storage, but it is a huge number of connections into the database, and to make that more stable, reliable, and consistent, ACCSP staff reached out and did a proposal through FIS for IRA funds, and we were approved for a project that I think we're about getting the funds in place now, but it's $350 some odd thousand over 2 years to work on that infrastructure, whether that's equipment within ACCSP or cloud-based approaches to make all that more scalable and redundant and stable. We want to promote and support communication of ACCSP activities by committee members within their agencies. So we've done great with getting the newsletters out on a monthly basis of what committee activities and program activities are occurring. We've heard good feedback from you all in the past that that's an appropriate way to go. But sometimes there's additional messaging and important tasks that aren't being shared back out within the agencies. And so the operations committee and advisors came up with an idea that we want to promote through next year, which is coming up with items to share within the meeting summary. So a top couple of bullets of these were common themes or important actions that occurred that may not have been caught in each individual's notes or task list, but would be something to take back and share within your agencies and beyond, or maybe even collect feedback on. And then the last item is really, as always, to continuous improvement of our website, which remains a focus to both maximize information sharing and data availability, engaging our website and our users to provide information out to folks. So those are the major items in the action plan for next year. I do want to highlight that we have more advisors at this point, and we still do need more. And so a task request for you is to go back and work on finding more advisors. Between your last meeting and now, Maryland took this to heart and had a very successful campaign to advertise and request for more advisors. They got many more applicants than they expected, and they were able to find 2 new members that were able to participate in the ranking process this fall. And so the current advisor members are on screen for you to see now. But again, we can share that successful campaign message back out with you, and hopefully those that are ready to expand your advisory capacity will be able to do so. Another highlight is on SciFish. So the project builder and application have been launched. This was a 3+ year effort, including Julie and Kathy and Julia Bird and a whole SciFish organizing committee. The SciFish advisory panel has been reviewing some applications. There are 2 new projects within the approval process now. And this is another one of those places that we call, well, I tend to call it a surprising example of government efficiency. So the Pacific States and the Gulf States Commissions are interested in hosting SciFish architecture for their partner agencies. But in speaking with our MOU, we're keeping to the Atlantic coast, sharing the technology for them to deploy and work with their partners on their coast. So we're kind of excited about that development as well. Next highlight is on the Atlantic Recreational Discards Pilot Project. Again, this was something that was developed through the RecTech Committee, developed with MRIP staff guidance. There are 7 states that wanted to be part of this pilot, and you have all just approved that for funding. The goals are really to analyze for potential digit bias, collect additional lengths of released fish. The approach of this is to use a catch card, a paper catch card. It's a little bit of a low-tech approach, but that's its genius. And the group worked really hard to make that work. The chair and vice chair, Angela Giuliano and Don Franco, were able to go to the Gulf States Commission workshop on release catch methodologies this summer. Because they were presenting it as the states, it was very well received by the Gulf group, and there's a whole Gulf contingent that now wants to try this and develop a proposal for the Gulf IRA red snapper funding to try that attempt Gulf-wide. So again, kudos to that subcommittee for coming up with the approach and sharing that with our partners. Next slide. There's also been progress in data collection for MRIP in unsampled waves. So this was raised as South Carolina wanted to do this for Wave 1 2025. Since then, the Rec Tech Committee and others have been discussing the ability to do the for-hire telephone survey that's possible with his existing staff and budgets. It's looking right now like we'll be able to do Maryland through Georgia for January, February 2025 to begin getting for-hire effort in those waves in Wave 1. The desire for fishing effort survey or dockside intercepts is there, but the timing is just not right for that. That would require additional funding. And with the FES going through its pilot test of the design changes, there's potential for the private angler fishing effort survey to collect Wave 1 data in 2026. But again, the state range for that would be unknown right now. So after this meeting, if you guys are interested in creating a block of states to work forward to that, that would be good to do so. The next item is admittedly a busy slide, but a place that we're looking to go and identify feedback from coordinating council as well as operations committee is the primary data collection initiatives that ACCSP is taking part in and already kind of committed to. So the eTrips validations are fully on their way to get out there. The one-stop reporting and state needs I've mentioned already. So the items that are kind of in the background portion of the arrow are things like electronic dealer reporting, redesign, and registration tracking, getting more information of the fishing entities into the software programs will be ongoing activities. In addition to those planned activities, we have these pentagons of things that are coming up for us. There's opportunities for biological data loads and display. Mentioned that as part of the action plan already. There's opportunities to extend charter observer data from North Carolina to Georgia, supported through the Southeast Fisheries Science Center in the same methodology that's being used in Florida and throughout the Gulf of Mexico. And then also looking forward to the for-hire logbooks and dockside sampling, the ACCSP certification methodology. That's going to be efforts to get it certified in 2025 and then kind of see what can happen for implementation forward to there. So these different perspectives, focus areas are things that we're trying to work out. Do we have the right staff and the balance of staff and contractors to kind of get these tasks done to answer the needs of the partners? And so that's where I wanted to share with you, the plate is kind of full now and looking forward, but there's still opportunities to shift that depending on the priorities of the coordinating council. And with that, I will pause for questions.
All right, thank you so much, Jeff. Appreciate that. Time for questions, and I see Dan McKiernan. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jeff. I have two questions. In an earlier slide, you mentioned one of the tasks is collection and management of spatial data. Could you help me understand I'm thinking in the lobster tracker data, there's probably a lot of applications that have to be written so that we can look at this data on a sub-regional basis. Could you describe what those challenges are and how quickly there may be some tools for states to use some of that data?
I can, and I'm also going to phone a friend next to me here. So one of the supported projects for today was an extension of those VMS applications. So as that was put in place this year, learning the challenges of what comes in the data, what are the states interested in pulling back out of that information, how to do that efficiently so that it is fast enough to answer the needs of the partners, and doesn't crash the system on our end, and be flexible with that. So that's a proposal that you all just supported funding and will probably take place in the coming year. And I'm going to pause and hand it over to Julie to add information to that.
Yeah, a big part of that is the framework. So right now it was built for the lobster framework. So we have the vessels that are expected to have lobster trackers. And as you mentioned in lobster meeting, Massachusetts is already looking to have other fisheries be part of this. And we need frameworks for those that will include those business roles. And so we're going to develop a adaptive module so that new frameworks can just be built without further programming. And that's a big part of it. And then another big part of it is making sure that the data are accessible in ways, in that sort of raw data way, so that folks could get those down for analyses. But then we've also been working with folks on sort of essentially tiered materialized views so that they can be available beyond the basic data for a sort of higher level analyses. But we need to work with the stakeholders on exactly what that looks like at this point.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Where we're going with some of that tracker data, especially with that next fleet, is really innovative. We want to map eelgrass beds and have geofencing techniques. So we're kind of way out forward of that, but I truly appreciate whatever help you can give us to get there. I did have a second question. And Jeff, I know that the New England Council recently kind of echoed a DMF request of ours to have the APIS interviewers ask anglers to sort of identify fishing location. Can you give us an update as to if this is going to be possible in the next year or two?
Thank you. Yes, I just got the letter Friday from the New England Council, and thanks for kind of giving me a heads up that was coming as well. It fits very well, that letter and the request from Massachusetts fits well into what the ACCSP Recreational Technical Committee is already got their eyes on. We got a letter from Massachusetts requesting that. Did that come from Story? Or, sorry. Anyway, we did get a request. They're going to be, RecTech is going to be talking about it both on October 30th and their December 5th in-person meeting, really to take that request, scope it out in terms of how would that apply to a question within APIS or questions. How would that map look? How would anglers actually identify where it would go? And how many states are interested in this map grid going up and down the coast to really identify that either the 10-minute grid scale or a different methodology to do that. Once those parameters are set by RecTech and how many states would want to do it, it then goes to MRIP and their PRA process for additional questions. I believe the next time that comes up is preparation in 25 in the PRA questions in 26, and we need a few months to program that into the tablets. So it's definitely on track for discussion. We're taking it seriously, but it's a process to add those questions and fit it in with the Paperwork Reduction Act.
Good, Dan. All right. Thanks for that. And next I'll go to Kathy.
Great presentation, Jeff. Thank you very much. Two questions. The first one is going to be one slide back with the data priorities slide. Fantastic. So the items there that are in Aqua that have to do with expanding or building out new initiatives, is that a good way of kind of thinking about them? It's work to come. It's additional work to come. Do we think in light of the conversations that came up originally through ops and advisors and was touched on today, particularly with Pat's comments in terms of funding subcommittee, having more conversation about the impact of the administrative grant, when we see information like this, reminding us to sort of have that sidebar conversation about how much these new items and maybe starting to get into some kind of a symbol or a metric or something that kind of identifies this would be a low, medium, or high addition in terms of staff, or these new initiatives will be primarily contracted out and have no effect on admin. I think that might help us moving forward as we try to keep this idea at the front of our mind, and whether we can or can't get more money coming to ACCSP because of the buildup of the administrative budget in terms of the functionality that all of the partners are now reliant on. I think that would be particularly helpful as we start to continue to talk about changes in the admin budget relative to whether you get the approval or the direction to add new work. That would be one comment. I didn't know if you wanted to respond.
Thanks, Kathy. And I think those are definitely good conversations to keep going with. And I probably glossed over a few things on the slide that I just want to add in for your awareness today. When it comes to biological data loads, that is work that is capable to be done by existing staff. And most of that data would be, it's setting up the processes and data flows for it to get sent to ACCSP and loaded on a regular basis. So that one is pretty well approached, and scoping out what that presentation methodology would need to be might take an FIS grant. We'd probably find that as a contract approach, one-time development, and then we would maintain that in-house. We've got a kind of long track record of doing that with different projects. When it comes to the charter observer data from North Carolina through Georgia, the Southeast Fisheries Science Center has identified funds to go directly to those 3 states to hire staff and go out and do charter vote at sea observers. And the piece for ACCSP would be to take a component already developed by the Gulf Commission and Karen Canal as the Apex interface. Application Express is the Oracle web interface. And literally take what's already been built and paid for, and with some support from Southeast Fisheries Science Center to install and modify that for ACCSP. So again, it's contract staff, it's a maintenance load, but it's not a major initiative for our software programming staff to take on. And then the for-hire logbooks and dockside sampling is putting a lot of staff time into developing a methodology theory and design before that goes out into a field. And once that design is approved once and certified by MRIP, then it's open for implementation by any Atlantic Coast partner again and again and again when they're ready for it. So that whether that was a federal or a state logbook program that wanted to meet those parameters. So again, so it's work at the beginning, but once that's developed, it's not a workload on ACCSP staff or the admin grant to put that design in the field. That would be funded either by MRIP or by a state, and the data flow through would be data processing that's already part of the MRIP grant.
Could they come to ACCSP with a new proposal to implement after it was gone through the MRIP approval process?
I would think yes.
Okay, that just popped in my mind. Thank you. Second question had to do, if you don't mind, if you'll humor me with going back a few more slides, when we were talking about the data standards for, it included citizen science at the very bottom of it. One or two more previous. It was near the beginning, sorry. There we go, there we go. So ACCSP's meat and potatoes is defining data standards. Excited to see on there the components that will be coming in through the new discard catch cards and lengths of the discarded fish. The one that I was intrigued with the most and didn't expect was the citizen science records. How does that interaction, how do you see that interaction occurring with developing data standards for the citizen science records when programs that are successful with going through the SciFish process and the SciFish advisory panel. And we have made standards using current ACCSP approved data fields that they can only choose from those. We front loaded that to streamline consistent data standards. So what portion of that is needed in the citizen science records moving forward? Do you understand my question?
I do, and it's
Excellent.
not about the data collection. In my view, it's something that has to be worked out about data presentation. So right now, we get biological data in from different places on discards. So trip report has information on released catch. A APIS interview, an observer trip, a citizen science record, they're stored in 4 different places. And so how do you pull the right information from each of those 4 places and rebuild a coherent picture that answers the questions that the users need? So it's less about redefining how citizen science should ask the question and more asking the data users, what's the best way to present it back out?
Do you see that happening through the Rec Tech Committee? Or is that more of a developmental thing through?
I think partially Rec Tech. I think it's going to be a collaborative effort across several committees because I don't think any one of us knows the answer.
All right, great discussion. Other questions for Jeff? No hands in the room, any hands online? No hands online. All right. So I think that will, Jeff, unless there's, oh yeah, no, I'm not going to forget that. Don't worry. I'm just making sure we're done with the program updates. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So we're done with that part of the agenda, and now we're on to the election of the next chair and vice chair. So I'll start with the chair, and first I'll start by saying it's been a lot of fun chairing this committee. I think this committee is super important. It enables a lot of both fundamental and cutting edge stuff that we're doing with data that allows us to do our work. So it's been a real pleasure being a part of that. But alas, all good things must come to an end. So I'll be turning over the chairmanship after this meeting. To my left here, Miss Kathy Knowlton has been riding along shotgun. She's been super helpful, super engaged. And so unless there are any objections, I think it would be prudent to appoint Kathy as our next chair. So looking around the table, wasn't anticipating anyone flagging me down. So I don't think we need a motion. As long as nobody jumps up and shouts, then I think we're good. So we'll consider Kathy to be our new chair for the coordinating council. So congratulations, Kathy. So I promised Kathy I'd finish up this meeting and she'll take over with a clean slate next time. All right, there's the chair. So next we need now a new vice chair. So I will look over to Bob for a nomination.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your 2 years of service to the coordinating council. Really appreciate it. So I can sit here and I usually can't vote or make motions. So I'm gonna take advantage of this opportunity and nominate Renee Zobel to my right for vice chair of the ACCSP coordinating council.
Great, so we've got a nomination. Is there a second to that nomination by Dan McKiernan? Great. Are there any objections to the nomination of Renee for the vice chair position? Seeing none, congratulations, Renee, to the vice chairmanship. Okay, that takes care of the. You sure could, Jeff, go ahead.
I just want to take a moment and say thank you to Jason for his 2 years as being chair. We've got your name added to the official plaque of those who served as coordinating council chairs. I will certainly miss your efficient meeting running style, as well as having a bow tie next to me up here in the front, try and copy you or, you know, stay stylish alongside. So thank you for your leadership and your help in keeping ACCSP moving forward.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Oh, yep, go ahead, Jeff.
And while I have the floor, and saying thank you, I did want to look across the table at Mel Bell. So glad to have you here. On your official retirement meeting, you were not with us. You were on another event. And so appreciate your being able to be here with us again. Appreciate your years of time and service to ACCSP on the coordinating council and your mentorship, both as a fisheries professional and a friend, to get us through all this. So thank you once again for all of your time and efforts with us.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right, thank you, Mel. All right, so that takes us to the end of the agenda. Unless anybody has other business, not seeing anyone raise a hand around the table, I think we can go ahead and adjourn if we're going to motion to do so. Motion made by Dan. Is there a second? Seconded. I'm going to assume there are no objections to that. So thank you, everybody. We're adjourned.